think we can start. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Data to Doorsteps panel. I was thinking of calling it, a play on crime and punishment, but there's no punishment. But what we do have are two brilliant researchers who I will ask to introduce themselves, studying and innovating in a space that I don't think we have seen many social scientists actually create innovations for. I think there's a lot of study of the problems, and there's a lot of policy advocacy. But what most excites me about this, and generally about the SHAPE space, is social scientists, SHAPE researchers coming forward with solutions to tackle them. And that's what we're going to talk about today, and a bit about the journey. So I'm going to ask first for Nuria to introduce yourself to the audience and your venture.
Thank you. So I'm Nuria. Oh, sorry, Mike. I'm Nuria Lorenzo-Dus. I am a professor of linguistics at Swansea University, and I direct Project Dragon, or the innovation is called Dragon, which is an acronym that stands for Developing Resilience Against Grooming Online. And hopefully that kind of says what it is that we're doing, but in a line, what we're doing really is supporting the child protection ecosystem by developing technology that helps professionals in particular in their efforts at keeping children safer online, with a focus on safer from sexual exploitation and abuse online.
And Lella.
Hi, thank you. So my name's Lella Nouri. I'm a professor of criminology at Swansea University, so I feel like myself and Nuria are holding the Welsh flag today. I don't know how that's happened, but it's lovely to be on a panel with Nuria. So my work focuses on extremism, hate crime, and community safety. And I've always had an interest in how public spaces shape perceptions of belonging and safety. My venture is called StreetSnap. And basically what it is an app designed to rid hateful graffiti, leafleting, stickering from our streets. So, any sort of racist graffiti or anything of that nature, it's not very well captured at the moment by frontline practitioners. There's no good way for them to record it, to remove it, etc. So we, myself, along with the Innovation Lab, Wales now, it's been rebranded at Swansea University, created a tool to very easily record and capture that harmful graffiti. AI categorizes it and maps it and sends it to the right authority, and it's a really useful tool for practitioners to be able to better record, monitor and remove hateful graffiti from our streets.
So staying with you, Lella, how did this journey start? It is not obvious to me how you go from studying this area to being like, actually, I'm going to design a technological solution to it.
Yeah, it was interesting. It definitely didn't take a very straight and narrow path. It was one that was very windy, and I didn't anticipate that I was going to do it. But for many years, I've been working in the space of extremism and hate crime, and mainly in the counter-extremism space until about 2018. And we started to look at prescribed material that was coming up on the streets of Swansea, strangely enough, and people think Swansea. But there was a lot of sort of extreme right happenings around the cities. And I've always been interested in, and apologies to those in the room who feel differently, not in just writing books that perhaps other academics might read, or potentially a student might read a chapter, but actually having some real world impact. So I've always worked with communities and worked with local practitioners, and I kept hearing the same things over and over again, that public spaces communicate belonging and exclusion, both negatively and positively. Practitioners were saying, we know there's all this hateful graffiti, but we don't really know what to do with this. We just remove it as quickly as possible, and that's it. And all this data was getting lost. Communities were saying to me that, it was having an impact on how they use public spaces. So, for example, some of the BAME communities that I work with in Swansea were saying that they, avoid certain areas because they don't feel like they belong there, and there's racist graffiti or whatever it may be. And I started to realize, and it wasn't a quick process, it sounds really quick when I talk about it like this, but it was many years that, actually we needed a tool that would bring together that lived experience problem and the problem that frontline practitioners were having, and take that research and turn it into something that could be practical and useful. So StreetSnap began as sort of filling an evidence gap in many ways, and it was just clear to me that there was no tool. For example, practitioner in Bridgend was asking people, asking PCSOs, asking Cleaner Streets teams to send them pictures on WhatsApp of the graffiti, and he was keeping them on his phone. I mean, what kind of system is that? So, StreetSnap is not revolutionary in terms of, it's not some fantastic new piece of technology. It's a simple tool to help with a quite complex problem. And I guess it was just a research venture until I got involved in the ARC program, and that's when I really felt like I could take that from a research idea and something that I thought was really exciting and actually take it to people and make it something that was able to be commercialized.
And Nuria?
Yeah, so in my case, I'm trying to figure out, although the concept did not exist at the time, let alone the term, whether my journey started with a sense of FOMO. And it probably is right, although I'm talking about, I said, an era where there was no such term. But essentially, I'm a linguist, and I was doing linguistics things, so like describing language systematically and looking for patterns, and then wondering, what do I do with these patterns? I can, in linguistics, we can describe things in a really detailed manner, and according to systematic frameworks and blah blah blah. And I thought there must be a way in which you can put all this descriptive knowledge to some good use, but I hadn't really found what that would be. And then, I started thinking that maybe what I could look at was more the social side of things in terms of persuasion and manipulation. How does that happen? Kind of like the influencers of, back in the before influencing was a thing, and then at that point, this is where the FOMO, instead of without the name FOMO, developed, because I felt that in the area, for example, of cybercrime, or actually in digital technology, when you're looking at a digital environment, everything that we tend to do in a digital environment, we do it through language, so, our behaviors are pretty much language-based, where language would not just be words, it would be emojis, videos, all these sort of multimodal dimensions of communication. And yet, many areas in which, language was crucial to, for example, crime and how crime happens, were being examined from non-linguistic backgrounds and frameworks. And therefore, we had a wealth of knowledge from criminology, from psychology, and also a little bit from computer sciences, NLP at the time. And I started looking into that, into some of those areas and some of those papers, research papers, and they were saying things like, oh, what we need is a richer description of, what happens with language. I was going, oh, linguists, they need linguists, and that's where, as I said, the FOMO kind of like, thought, well, maybe there's actually added value that as a linguist you can bring into a wealth of knowledge and then contribute to something. So that was really the starting point for me, to realize that we could go beyond description, in linguistics, and actually apply that knowledge and those systems and those frameworks to real life issues. And the real life issue that I actually started with was not child protection or child sexual abuse and exploitation. It was more radicalization. Actually, it's confession time. We did work together on that as well. But then, especially in online child sexual exploitation and abuse, then I noticed that there was a lot of concern around our inability to tackle grooming. And grooming is communication through language use. It's manipulation through language, as I said, not just words, but images and so on. So that's where I then started thinking that there was a way in which we could certainly use that linguistic expertise that we were bringing together as a team. By then I was already working with a team, and try and develop more robust technology, both to help detect and prevent grooming, and to do that through collaboration with the end users that we would want to benefit from that. And we can talk more about it later perhaps, but that's where the journey really took its current shape, where we had a strong theoretical foundation and strong analytical basis, and then we thought, right, now we need to make these usable. And usable by whom? So we're sort of determining who your audience or who your users would be. And we decided at that point that it would be frontline professionals, the ones that really couldn't cope with the current pandemic of child sexual exploitation and abuse, because they were just totally overwhelmed, by the sheer volume of it and the sophistication of it and the currently and fast evolving nature of grooming tactics. So that's why we thought we would put our focus on, frontline professionals, your social workers, your educators, your law enforcement, investigation teams, try and sort of make their day-to-day jobs less onerous and less demanding than they currently, or they were at the time, and unfortunately they currently are, but we're sort of working with them. So that was the journey kind of thing up until now.
Well, staying with you then, Nuria, you're not developing the next B2B software as a service tech platform. You're developing technology in an incredibly sensitive area. What have been some of the challenges in developing that? And some of the considerations, you mentioned the people you work with, like social workers, the police force, they are obviously having to deal with this quite challenging data as well. How do you develop a solution when you've got those challenges?
So, there have been and there remain significant challenges. I think I probably would like to identify two. The first one, you've mentioned it, Chris, has to do with data. The data is incredibly sensitive. So who has that data that we can analyze and we can actually identify patterns from and then use them for developing technology? Many, including industry. But who can access that data? Oh, hardly anyone. So data access has been a significant issue in the field. And what I noticed, again, starting from research, which I think is important to all of us here, we want to get into the real world, but it has to come from a position of a strength within what we do, which is the research. There has to be that foundation there. So I looked at, the studies that were empirical, and primarily they were using a data set for grooming that was not real. So it was a data set in which you had convicted offenders, but then they were interacting with decoys, with adults pretending to be children rather than with children. So I still did, there was that data set was significant, a significant size, so I still did an analysis of that, and then I presented that to law enforcement and waited. And of course the question came up straight away, but those are not real children. I said, I know. So how do we go beyond this? Who has access to data with real children? And they said, we do. I said, well, let's try and work out how we're going to then make sure that we use that data set in a responsible and ethical way, to be able to improve and enhance the work that we've done so far. And that was a challenge. Governance around that was a challenge. And, fast forward 3 years, we did, but 3 years, fast forward 3 years. So that is a significant challenge, and it hasn't really stopped being a significant challenge. So, once you also have access to that data, there comes a hell of a lot of responsibility in how you process that data ethically. So, but that's not so much a challenge. That is actually then, something that, within the university we're able to work with and do it properly, I feel, So that is the one big challenge, data, and people still say that's the biggest one, The second one, however, has to do with the sensitive nature of the data that we're looking at and the research team, right? So is the researcher well-being, and how we're going to make sure that we actually are not too badly impacted by the work that we're doing. And that's interesting, again, from a linguistic perspective, because I looked at what support there was out there, again, starting with the literature, with research papers on researcher well-being in the social sciences, and most of the examples came from studies in which, the researcher had to look at images, and we have looked at images in another project, and yes, I can tell you that the images will be horrible, but what if you're only looking at language? There wasn't anything there for, us linguists who are still doing a deep read of content that once you read it, it's very difficult not to remember that you've read it. So that whole side of researcher well-being and making sure that by then, we were working in teams of 10, 12 researchers. So it's trying to put a sort of a researcher well-being protocol in place where there was none for us to use. And that was challenging in the context, for example, of having received funding and needing to finish doing some work by a certain point in time. Well, you may not be able to code analyze for more than, we decided in our team, for example, that we would limit it to, say, 12 hours a week, over periods of no more than 3 hours, then we would actually be doing that together on campus, in the middle of COVID too. So obviously for a while we weren't able to make any progress. So that has actually been a challenge, but again, I think it's been one that we now have learned from and have something to, that we can actually extrapolate for others. So those two, one on the side of, the end use and the data, and the other one on the research team.
That's brilliant. And Lella, you obviously sit at the intersection of the community and the local authority. How did you develop StreetSnap, balancing the respective needs and working with local authorities, who I think in general are seen as quite, not by their own fault, but quite challenging to work with when you kind of move over to the delivery side?
Yeah, thanks. It's been an interesting journey in that, the teams that I directly work with in the councils or the counter-terrorism teams within the police, whatever it may be, they're already sold. They understand what StreetSnap is for, they want it, and so there's no need to sort of sell them the idea or tell them how they need it. But in regards to councils more generally, think how many jobs a council has and how many remits they work under, right? So the people that I generally tend to work with, they're not budget holders, they don't have any decision-making capabilities in terms of what they can use or what they can prioritize. So that's been difficult because I've always centered around the human impacts. How does this affect the public in terms of feelings of belonging, fear, safety, that kind of thing. But what I found is that everybody knows that problems related to exclusion, hate crime, extremism are a problem. Everybody feels that, no matter where they are or where they come from. So there wasn't a problem in people not understanding the harm. The harm was already there. The problem was a lack of a system. And I think that made it much easier. It was actually solving a problem that they actually already identified as a problem. And I saw that with the community, but I also saw it with the practitioners that I worked with as well. I already had the trust. I think that was a key thing. I already had the trust with the communities from the research that I'd done, with the work that I had done with them previously, and the same with the practitioners, so that was massive. But the biggest thing overall of being able to work with communities and work with practitioners on this was the fact that StreetSnap was co-produced. So I had some funding from the Welsh Government through a funding stream that they call the Smart Partnership. And through that, I was able to partner with Bridgend Council, which is in South Wales, and we created StreetSnap together. So, of course, originally it came from my brain and this need, but I don't know what their daily work lives are like. I don't know, what systems they use already, or even simple things that you don't think about. Remember that project with the police? Yeah, which never went anywhere. What they can actually access on their phones and what apps they're actually allowed to download and little things like that, right? All of that kind of stuff helped, but also just the language that they used was so different to me. So by the time we came to the end of the pilot year with Bridgend and we had that fully working prototype, that was no longer really the idea that I had in my head. That was something that was created by practitioners for practitioners. And what's happened now is that Bridgend are the ones that sort of champion it rather than me. And that builds the trust. That makes people realize that actually, this is a tool that we really need and that will really help us. So that co-production is really key. But also open communication about the fact that, a lot of people would say to me, well, hateful graffiti, there's so many problems in regards to extremism. Are we really going to focus and put our money and energy into that? And having that open communication to say, well, actually, yeah, I understand that there might be priorities that seem more important, but for many people, this is the gateway. right? This is where people see, you know, extremist ideology. It's where they get their hate from, or on the other end of the spectrum, it's where people start to feel excluded, right? So it is just as important. So, you know, being able to have that open communication and that respect was really key. And I would echo what Nuria said as well about data. Data in my area is a little bit different because it's data in the public space. Nobody owns it. It belongs to everyone in a sense. So we've been able to get around a lot of those things. But it's still really horrible stuff to look at, right? So there is that research welfare problem as well. But I often use that as a way to demonstrate how important it is to rid this from our streets where we walk every day. And my daughter's 6, right? We live in a lovely suburban area of Swansea where she doesn't see all this horrible graffiti. But when we go into town, she does. And she's getting to that age where she'll start to question me about it, you know, and she'll ask me, what does that say and why have people put that there? And I want to be able to not have to answer that question. I don't want it to be there. And often I think it's that personability, being able to tell those stories, that really makes a difference. And I've always framed StreetSnap as what it is, which is, you know, an early warning tool, a prevention tool, rather than something that's, you know, trying to police society or further increase surveillance. You know, it's not an anti-graffiti tool. And I think because I've come from a place of trust and worked with these communities for a long, long time, you know, I've been able to do that much easier than if I was just this sort of random academic that came in with a solution already well packaged and bright and shiny.
Well, just a quick follow-up there. You mentioned some people might think instinctively, oh, yeah, graffiti's not the big problem in extremism. Is it the case that the local authorities, where that's more prevalent, because they maybe have communities that have been affected by it, have been more keen to work with you as a result? Do they recognise it's a priority and this can really solve it?
You'd think so, but what I've found is actually the opposite, because the ones where there is a big problem with graffiti, they're very good at taking it down very quickly, but they're not keeping that data. They're not using it for intervention purposes. They're not trying to use that to realise the tensions in the community. The councils and the boroughs where I've had the most sort of enthusiasm have been the ones where there is a low level you know, issue and hateful tensions. And I think it's because it's new and they're surprised by it, or they think it's new. And that's where I've had, you know, the most sort of traction. Interestingly, the larger areas have had real difficulty in trying to engage with them. And I think it's because they think that they're already solving the problem by removing the graffiti. But I would say that's one very, very, very small part, because it was up there, someone's seen it, and that has already had an impact. And also the people that are putting it on the walls. You know, this tells us a lot about what's happening in communities at that time. And often that kind of low-level extremist activity, or hateful, whatever we want to call it, is the gateway. And my work prior to this was looking at online extremism. And I always looked at the groups that, governments, the police, they weren't that bothered about, they were low level, they were very careful about what they put on social media. And Nuria and I did a project together on groups like this that were very active on, Facebook and Twitter at the time and what have you. And we had a lot of questions as, why are you focusing on these groups? Why don't you, go on the dark web and look at the prescribed organizations? I was like, well, actually, this is tells us more about society and what we need to do in terms of early intervention than any sort of other groups. And it's the same with the stuff on the streets, I think. So that has helped as well, having that background in that research, even though in a slightly different area.
Nuria, you work with the police forces. Mm-hmm. This is, I think, definitely the first on the ARC accelerator that's ever worked with the police force. Mm-hmm. Was it easy getting their trust? Did they recognise your work as a priority in the way that sort of Lella had to navigate?
So, was it easy? No. Was it worth it? Yes. So, I think, in terms of, trust, what does the police mean by, when they trust you or they do not trust you, what does that mean, right? I think it means different things, in the sense of the kind of technology that you want to co-create with them, and then co-creation is key, as Lella was saying. But so I mentioned earlier that Dragon is about technology that helps, counter grooming, and it does that in two ways, which corresponds to two intertwined technology solutions. One of them is an online grooming detection tool, so AI linguistics powered tool for law enforcement, right? So trust there, it's not just trusting you as an academic who's going to help them. They already shared the data with you, and they know that you're going to treat it, you know, in a responsible, ethical manner. So there's obviously trust there as well. But it's actually, you know, trusting what you're going to produce for them and how they're going to use it. And of course, it's AI, so it's black box. You know, how on earth are we going to know? And it's so new in, you know, in policing that this is being used, and there's new legislation all the time and new guidelines as to how they can use AI. They cannot use it. So it's not just you as a team. You know, I haven't really experienced. We haven't really as a team experienced any situation where they don't trust our ability to develop the technology, because, you know, you're in the university, they assume that you're really smart and you know what you're doing, which is true. We know what we're doing and we are all smart. But it's not really that kind of trust. It's like, you're going to give us a product that we don't really understand, you know, because it's still, you know, black box from their point of view, because the police are not the computer scientists within the police in some high-tech unit. They are the investigators, the digital forensic teams, which are actually very good at IT, but not necessarily the AI side of things, and certainly not the integration with language analysis. So that's where, again, co-creation comes into place. So we made sure that, you know, from the beginning, we were able to show them how the analysis, the data that we started with, the analysis was then going to be fed into the solution. You know, what was sort of we worked on what is called as explainable AI. And we also said very clearly that the idea here was to end up with a tool that would inform decision making rather than replace them as analysts or as units. So not because they would lose their job, not because of that, but because they would still have the control and the knowledge of what is it that they were going to do with the outputs that the software was producing. So I think that is crucial, this idea that, you know, they need to be involved from the beginning, especially when the technology is so new and changing so fast that they feel completely, you know, ignorant around the technology itself or around the science itself. So that's what trust. So it has been challenging, it has been difficult, but it's been a case of co-designing as well with them. You know, what kind of output do you want? Oh, we need a report. Okay, what do you need in that report? Oh, that report needs to include actual examples. Okay, how do you need those examples to be, you know, presented? You know, you're just making sure that anything that can be, there's still an element of black box in any AI, I need to say, because you've got the large language models, and then God knows what happens in, you know, in part of that. But it's reducing that to the bare minimum, you know, so that they feel that they're still the ones. I really don't like, it's used a lot, I really don't like this idea of human in the loop. For me, it's the opposite. It has to be that the machine is in the loop, the human writes the loop. You know, so they need to feel that they're in control, you know, and that they actually have that final decision making, which of course they do, you know, so that would be the trust there. Do I have half a minute to talk about? Okay, so the other technology that we worked on is about prevention through training, and it's not necessarily for law enforcement, it's for social workers, educators, you know, for them to understand how grooming works from a language perspective so that they can then better work with children, for example. And their trust is different. That's why I wanted to mention this. There's no AI involved there. There's no scary technology. It's a humble training program, and those professionals are used to training and are used to online training, which is the case that, you know, for us as well. So trust is different there. But then trust has to do with the reputation. So again, they don't tend to challenge that we're smart, you know, we come from university, but then trust comes from the fact, in our case, for example, they know two things. One, that the data is real data, it's gold standard data, that we actually are, you know, developing technology that comes from robust empirical evidence, and that's crucial. And the second one is that we don't believe that we are, you know, the ones who know everything and know better. So we have worked very closely with lived experienced experts. And that is through obviously an NGO, in our case, Marie Collins Foundation, you know, and that has really transformed the credibility and therefore the trust in the training. You know, we had in the original research phase, we had a 6-month project sub-project to work with lived experience experts to develop the training, and that has ended up being an ongoing relationship where we still work with them, we still check everything with them, and that is, where I think part of the trust also comes from, the fact that we are always, checking that what we are producing resonates and is helpful to those who actually are the experts there. So those two dimensions of trust I would like to highlight.
Brilliant. And you've actually sort of presaged my next question, which was on the researcher to entrepreneur journey. So to Lella, you have obviously been expanding StreetSnap. How have you been doing that? And what have been the big challenges, particularly going from being a researcher? You obviously did the co-production, you did the pilot, but moving StreetSnap forward more as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I think the ARC program has really helped me with that, because, and I haven't been given any chocolates to say that, but in that I didn't feel comfortable as an entrepreneur. I did, and I still struggle with it a little bit, to be honest, and talking about pricing models and even thinking about pricing models or even looking at numbers, to be honest. Anything like that makes me think of GCSE maths and I start to get a little bit sweaty. But, I had to go on that journey for StreetSnap to get somewhere. And I was never doing it to make money. I don't make any money and I never will, unfortunately. But, it was about, I wanted to have some impact. And I knew that this was a tool that practitioners actually needed. And so I had that passion there. So the passion was never the problem. It was not understanding what a business model was, not knowing the right people to speak to about that kind of thing. And the ARC program really helped me with that in thinking, right, okay, if I actually want this to be a success, I need to get out of the academic bubble and stop talking to other academics about this lovely tool that I think is really nice, and start to speak to the right people. And that includes being quite, I guess Roger would say, forceful, who was one of the what was his official title? Coaches on the ARC program, making sure that you're talking to the right people and the right people are in the room. I would often spend lots and lots of time preparing really well put together, I felt like they were well put together presentations for people that already wanted StreetSnap. And I'd spend an hour and a half on a Teams meeting or go into some lovely council office, and actually there was nobody in the room who could actually make a decision about whether they could have StreetSnap or not. There was no one there who knew whether they had the funding, whether they would had access to funding or any of that kind of thing. So making sure that I had the ability and I had the strength to say, actually, I'm more than willing to come and speak to you, but can we please make sure that XXX is in the room? But taking it from a pilot in Bridgend to taking it to something that is scalable, the really big thing is making sure to have an internal champion, whether that's within the local authority that I'm trying to work with, or just from Bridgend maybe, or from Swansea that I work with very closely. That really helps. And I think being able to show that StreetSnap is a solution to stuff that the staff are already having to do. And often when I speak to people that are a little bit maybe higher up in terms of management or whatever it may be in the council, I preach to them about the policies that they've already said they're working towards, because it's only when you fit it into their existing mandate that they then understand, oh, okay, this helps me to tick X box. And unfortunately is a tick box exercise for them, because, and that's no offense to them, it's their job is to make sure that they're putting resources in the right place, so that I always try and show how StreetSnap and demonstrate how it connects to their strategic priorities, so whether that be in terms of big government policies, specific to the region as well. So in Wales, we have the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan. This is something that all organisations across Wales have signed up for. So I often cite that because, how can you be seen to be doing something if you're not dealing with a problem that's really affecting communities? And I'm quite strong in saying that because I do really feel quite passionate about it. One of the big things about StreetSnap that makes it different to the kind of software that you would just buy and would become shelfware in some sort of way is that what makes it successful is the continuous engagement and training. Councils, local authorities, policing boroughs, whoever it may be, the customer can't just buy the app and start using it. First of all, they have to receive training. Often that's in-person training in relation to why this is important. It's not training for how to use StreetSnap. My nana could use StreetSnap. It's that simple, right? What it is trying to ensure that the people that are using it, from a housing officer to a PCSO to someone on the Cleaner Streets teams, understands why this is important and why hateful imagery is such a problem within their city. And that, for me, really establishes that buy-in and make sure that keeps happening. And as part of StreetSnap and the packaging that we've put together as it is at the moment, there is continuous training within that as well. Of course, we do provide some training on how StreetSnap works and how you install it on your phone, because you'll be quite surprised how technophobe people can be in relation to that kind of thing. But yeah, it's about, you know, making sure that you're speaking to the right people in the right way. So it's not to say that those academic presentations are not ones that I still do and I love to do, but just to the right people and making sure the audiences are right, really.
Oh, Roger would be very proud to hear that.
I was hoping he might be here and hear me and give me a clap.
He's here in spirit. Living inside of you, audience first. Nuria, what about your own journey from academic to entrepreneur?
I think for me, the sort of biggest lesson has been to learn to say yes. Listen now, yes to this question. Does it cost any money? And for me to say yes. Because I still remember when we first, we're only developing or co-developing the grooming, the anti-grooming, the classifier, you know, the technology for law enforcement, and unexpectedly had interest from Western Australian police. I said unexpectedly because I've only just gone to Perth to give an academic talk, and you never think that that's going to go anywhere other than into your CV, perhaps, you know. And, you know, we arranged, a team's call then with law enforcement there, and I was ready, you know, to sell them the idea, the sort of the underpinning research, the rigor, how these would help them in terms of time management, you know, their own emotional, their own welfare and so on. But, I didn't even get to base 2. He was like, but does it cost any money? I'm like, oh, right. And not being ready to say, actually, at some point, yes, it will cost money, because even though we all agree this is technology that should be available for free, somebody's going to have to pick up the bill at some point and help develop this. So, you know, to say that without going bright red or mumbling, you know, has actually been really important. And to be able to provide a rationale of, you know, how much it costs and what they're getting for it, what's the value for money. So I think that has been, you know, really important in terms of the, you know, they wanted, you know, this sort of the technology has been co-developed with the end users who actually want this, and they want it in this particular way, and they wanted to do this and that and the other, and they don't need it to do this other bit. So, you know, you don't have to really persuade anybody, you know, to sort of want to adopt the technology, and they see the benefit. But there's going to have to be an element of, you know, cost for the end user. And also with AI tools, or at least the path that we've taken with our Dragon Spotter, which is the name of the grooming classifier, is that we want the end user to pilot it, or actually to review the outputs and then decide whether they agree or disagree. Sort of the methodology of reinforced learning in that needs to be adopted, and that is time for them. And that is, again, a challenge, you know, that, you know, you would have quite senior police, sort of like the head of digital forensics, and they definitely see it, but they don't necessarily have the decision making power to devote, you know, to get one member of their team or of some other team, you know, to work, you know, on this project, you know, which still needs to be piloted or tested before they can use it for this period of time, because they're doing much more important and pressing things, you know. So again, that sort of is sort of learning to say, yes, it does cost money, and yes, you're going to have to give us some of your time. And I know that that's difficult, because you've got your to-do list is, you know, humongous, and this will give you benefits not now, not next month, but maybe 6 months or maybe 9 months, depending on actually how the line of command then decides to take this up, or not. So there's an element of risk there in them giving time to you to work with you to get something that they know will work for them. So I think that's kind of like, you know, one of the challenges of moving from research to the real world when you're faced with those situations in which, you know, there are such constraints that are very difficult to, you know, foresee at the start. And again, you know, as Lella was saying, and again, I'm not getting any free chocolate or anything like that, but the ARC program actually gives you a little bit more confidence, or, you know, to say yes, it does, and it does for this reason and that reason, you know. And now, how can we make sure that we look for that money together? You know, where can we look together to get into this and the other? And then quite often they'll say things like, oh yeah, there's a pot of money that we can actually apply for this kind of thing, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, sort of you work that through. For the training solution we call Dragon Shield, we've ended up charging a nominal fee. And again, I don't feel totally comfortable with it, if I'm honest, because I think that training should be freely available to professionals. But it's the only way that we can keep the research going, and we can keep and maintain the solution. And it's about standing and saying, and that is the reason why, and that's where the money goes. And then that doesn't solve all issues, but it actually helps a lot.
Well, oh, of course.
Can I come in on that, on pricing? I think that's a really good point. I found that really difficult. Just talking about pricing generally and being able to say, yes, it does cost money. But also, just I don't know if it's just local authorities and policing boroughs and that kind of thing, but if it's a licensing situation and there's a rolling cost, they're much more nervous than if it's a one-off fee. So, you know, local authorities will happily pay thousands to a training provider or an academic to provide a one-off session on X, and they don't think anything of it. And then I would ask for a similar amount of money or less for StreetSnap, and they'd hear the word license and they would run away. And that was a really interesting learning curve. I've just stopped using that word. And it's made such a difference, because they would happily ask me to go and give them some training on the use of Telegram by extremist organisation, and they'd pay me a one-off fee. That was less. That was more, sorry, than what StreetSnap cost for the year. But then they would question me about what the cost of StreetSnap and what happens and do we have to renew and all this kind of thing. And the other problem, not problem, but challenge in relation to dealing with big organisations like that is IT infrastructure. So, you know, so pricing is one thing, you get over that, and then the IT guys come and say, absolutely not. We can't have the app on our systems, it just won't work. And then actually, if you actually get to speak to them, and there's not a gatekeeper, and you actually have them in the room, and you show them what the tools are and how they've been made, they're like, oh yeah, that's fine. And so it's just being able to have those conversations, because what happens is the decision makers think, oh no, this is going to be a problem for IT, so I'm going to say no. So it's, you know, the ARC program has allowed me to be able to think ahead and know that those questions are coming, both from experience but also from understanding other people's journeys as well, because we're all facing similar problems, I think.
So I just want to pick up on one thing you said, Nuria, about the tension you felt in yourself about pricing, which I think is a very common one, I think, for particularly SHAPE researchers. And I think maybe partly it's because traditionally SHAPE researchers' impact has gone through, you know, mechanisms like policy, where there is no cost and it's more about communicating to the right people. Within your research communities, both university but also in the kind of criminology legal space, how have your innovations and your approach been received? Have you received, is it very positive, or this is brilliant, we hadn't thought of this, like this could be something for our research? Or have you also experienced pushback? Oh, you're charging for research? That's maybe not appropriate.
In my case, or in our case, I have had, there have been a couple of situations whereby, even though, say, for Dragon Shield, the training program is literally a nominal cost, there's still ideological view, a strongly ideological view that that shouldn't be there, that it should be freely available. And I've tried to explain, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So that's, I think, the tension that I've also felt, because there's so much training these days that is actually freely available. So yeah, that is that I think that remains still a little bit more difficult for me. In terms of the AI solution, no, everybody tends to understand that, you know, those things, and again, I don't know why, but, you know, nobody seems to think that it's a problem. You know, those things cost money because they've got the magic AI word, you know, or the 2 letters, so if it's AI, it must cost money. So I don't think there's an issue there. It's finding out who will make the decision to spend it there, and again, as you were saying, as a one-off, or something that, you know, continues to be, you know, on a licensing basis. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that is that sometimes what I've experienced is that when research is coming out of a university, even if it is like a piece of technology, an app like StreetSnap, there is an assumption that it's a free service. And that's quite a difficult thing to get over. So I've had a few, so we got featured in The Guardian a year ago now, and had a lot of flurry of emails from lots and lots of different councils across the nation. I thought, oh, you know, well, this is it. The university's going to be so happy, my impact case study, everything, woo. And then actually people just thought it was free. So all of a sudden those emails, those conversations, they went quite cold. And I think I don't know if that's a problem with how social science has always, you know, sort of offered services and that kind of thing. But there is this assumption that, oh, there's this great research that's come out there. They've created a tool. It must be free. I think it's changing, but there definitely was that challenge for me, and that continues to happen. But inside the organization, inside the university, I feel like I have the opposite problem, which is, why are we investing so much time in StreetSnap if you're not making any money? So it is a bit of a double-edged sword in many ways.
Okay, we're going to move on to my final question. So to the audience, you all heard my instruction at the start. I like audience questions, so start thinking hard. Otherwise, I'll pick on Kindling people to get the ball rolling. Starting with you, Lella. If everything's going well for StreetSnap, what would happen? What would it take for StreetSnap to become the default tool across local authorities in the UK? And where are you on that journey?
Thank you. It's a big question, and I'm glad that my impact officer is not here. But what we really need in relation to StreetSnap is to have lots of boroughs using it so that we can drive up the amount of data that we have. Because it's only when we have lots of data on the system that we're able to really showcase how beneficial StreetSnap can be. StreetSnap will only be as good as the number of frontline practitioners using it. So the perfect opportunity would be for an investor to walk up to me at the end of this panel, so please do, and say, I would like to invest, how much would it cost to roll this out to 4 boroughs? And I would do that regionally and, you know, roll it out for a year. And then I think we'd be in a position where we could really showcase how useful the tool has been. And I have a lot of faith that people would find it really useful. I don't think that would be a problem at all. But we'd also have the data to drive the intelligence. And I know people don't like that word, but it is intelligence about, you know, tensions in the community that could inform interventions that are already happening in the prevention space. So that would be the key thing. The other opportunity would be if the government said it was a mandate that all councils had to use StreetSnap. I'd take either option, is absolutely fine. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Well, Nuria, let's hear about the Dragon journey.
Yeah, so we have a plan. And it's very ambitious, but I think rightly so. So again, for the grooming detection tool for law enforcement, what the future hopefully will look like, and it's starting to shape up as, is that we've already run a couple of pilot projects or pilot deployment projects with police forces across the UK, and that's no small feat. As in, we know it can be deployed. You know, with the IT systems, it was a nightmare, and at times we actually found that it was never going to work, to be honest. So we know that it can be seamlessly integrated within other software that they use. So that's important for them because, you know, they get the data, the sort of phone extractions, for example, and they downloaded them into something that they've been using for years, which is obviously a commercial product, and then we needed to slot ourselves in. You know, obviously, you can imagine that the companies that develop those products do not want to talk to us about, you know, how can we play nicely, or not straight away. So, but we've managed to do that, so we know it can be deployed, and now it's about, you know, making sure that we generate further kind of like pilot studies, if you like, in which the forces then develop an understanding of how much time they can save, you know, when using this, and then how much better they can do their work. So that's kind of like the next, I think, 6 to 9 months, or maybe 12 months, depending on how many we take on board across the UK. So we, for example, we can now, having done a couple, we can tell them that this bit about performance metrics, we can tell them that, you know, the tool spots so many instances, you know, of grooming of this type, and they like that, you know. We can also then say, do you want to, you know, find out how much quicker it does it? Well, it kind of bulk upload 28,000 messages, you know, within these many hours, and they go, oh, that's much faster than what we can currently do it. So it's about gathering that momentum and continuing to, you know, to sort of develop that across forces. And actually, I'm presenting this as if it's fantastic. This is kind of like our plan B. Our plan A was to develop a trusted research environment nationally where everybody, you know, sends their data, and you get then just one solution across the country. We're still hoping for that, but that has proven really challenging. So again, being adaptable and saying, well, we're going to try this other route. It might not take us as quickly there, but that's what we're going to do. So that's one. That's what we're going to do with Spotter, with the detection software, at the same time as working across languages. So for example, we've had interest from an international police force, you know, to develop it, you know, with them, because that can be done. You know, large language models as well are getting better and better at being multilingual, and we do have the know-how, the skill set to do the adaptation. So that's one. And then for the training program, it's pretty much the same. You know, we have already trained, we had already had over 500 professionals, you know, done the SHIELD training, and we have some evidence on impact on practice, you know, how that helped them prevent grooming in so many cases, and how many more children, therefore, they were able to better support, and that's very important. So we're going to continue to do that across the UK, but we also received funding recently to develop it in Latin America in Spanish, because we also had a data set of grooming interactions in that language. So again, what we're thinking of is sort of developing a framework for adaptation so that we don't have to redo it in, you know, in a different way every time that new language comes along, even though there will be obviously nuances and differences that we'll have to take into consideration. But yeah, sort of, it's kind of like depth and breadth at the same time that we're hoping to develop over the next few years.
Thank you. Just about being adaptable, I think that's really key, and I had to change my thinking quite a lot along my journey. So one of the things I was adamant about from the beginning was that StreetSnap would only be for frontline practitioners. This wouldn't be a public I report it app, right? I didn't want members of the public being able to go and take pictures of hateful graffiti for the many reasons why I know you're all nodding in the room. But for the last year, there's been push and push and push from the government, from local authorities, that if StreetSnap was something that the public could use, there would be more interest in it. And, you know, I've reflected on that, and I've got over it, and I've had a bottle of wine and said, okay, fine, and decided that actually if that's what frontline practitioners think they need in regards for it to be usable, then we should test that. So the next stage for StreetSnap, and I've had a bit of funding to be able to try and do this next year, is I will not roll it out to the public and just see what happens. We all saw what happened with the counter-terrorism app that the government just rolled out. But I will pilot it with a test population and see how that works. Because the worry is as well that you'd get a lot of nonsense on there too. And, you know, sort of people reporting on neighbours and all that sort of thing. But yeah, so it's interesting that you have to change. And so StreetSnap was my baby for such a long time. And I think in many ways going on this journey of taking it from an academic research idea to a scalable venture has meant that I've had to move away from that and allow it to develop the way that it needs to develop and see what happens. I will say told you so if it doesn't work, but thank you.
Wonderful. We have time for questions. So, yes. Would you?
The last point around adaptability. I think it's more to Nuria, but let's see. So, how, you know, adaptable or transferable you see your technological solution to, for example, other online safeguarding questions, be it for, you know, adolescents or children, or, you know, more generally cybercrime. I would be maybe particularly interested in romance fraud, because this is, a project we're currently working on with Essex Police, not, online detection, but in general. And the second question would be, in the back of your mind, this might sound a bit of a science fiction, but are you worried about the misuse of this technology? And I'm thinking your online, grooming detection, if the, linguistic description would be on a corpus of, for example, strike action, which, I've done a bit of that, or it would be, opposition to the government, would you be afraid that at some point, just thinking of how, what we propose could actually be misused? Not necessarily by the UK government, of course, but is it, somewhere there in the back of your mind, if we create a tool that, for example, the one which could be adaptable then to actually detect other sorts of online behavior? Is this something that worries you? Thank you.
Yes, not even within other types of online harm or online behaviors. Even just if we just stick to grooming, just grooming, right? Over the past 7 years or so, I would say that every other presentation that we do to, and maybe an academic but also non-academic audience, it would be, wouldn't that be great if if parents were able to use this, so adapted to use by parents, or to put it in their kids' telephones, and develop products like this, so you can adapt it. And the answer is yes, you can. But are we ready to do so? I don't think so. Because of the reasons what you said, because it can be misused. So we have developed it for law enforcement at this point in time, and for law enforcement only, and as a triaging, prioritization tool for law enforcement. As I said, to inform decision making as opposed to replace decision making, or make decisions instead of the decisions that are made nowadays by humans. So adaptation is possible, and it can be adapted to other forms of online harm. No doubt about that. But I think it has to be really carefully managed, because yes, we are worried that in the wrong hands, it could be dangerous. And maybe somebody, would say, yeah, well, there are, nasty cops as well, aren't they? It may be misused by law enforcement. Yes, but that's why there has to be such strong governance on the users side of things too. So that, and we have built that within the the technology. So there's a login system. You have to have clear logs of who's used what have they done with the data, and that kind of thing. But it's not that because we're so smart. We know that we need to do that. I mean, law enforcement already have those in place. They don't use technology lightly like this. So that's where I feel that I'm not worried about that side of things. I am more worried about some of those adaptations when you go beyond, the law enforcement environment, even though it's needed there in those other contexts as well. But I think I'm playing it safely with the team and sticking to that side of things for now. With the training is similar, the training teaches, or you learn how grooming works. You learn what the bad guys do. So can that become training for the bad guys? Well, that's why we don't just let anybody in. We have, a vetting system, and we check, who's doing the training. And I've been asked a few times, can anybody sort of, can I do it from, on a personal basis, like as a mother or as a father? And the answer is no, no. But we are now developing, in terms of adapting, we're developing then training for parents and caregivers, for example, which will be a different type of training. So it's just sort of working sensibly on the adaptation, because the potential is huge. Really is, all forms of harm, all users, but you cannot grow like that. You can't, it has to be more responsible.
I think we've got time for one very quick question, if somebody's got one. Yes, on the front row.
What have been some of the challenges and opportunities of developing really innovative technology like this within a university environment, and perhaps what can others learn from it?
My TTO officer's in the room, so it's a bit tricky. So we're from Swansea University, and I wouldn't, you know, that's a challenge. I will say it, you know, it's a big question. I think for me, the biggest problem is people's misunderstanding of what commercialization is, what impact is, how important it is, and how it can feed into the ref, how much time it takes, and why and if this is more important than writing a 4 or 5-star book. So I think that the problem is accessibility, knowing who to speak to in the university, having the right people working in the university that actually have the connections to make this happen. I was in the panel this morning that was, you know, looking at how things are changing in this space and what's happening in regards to contracts around entrepreneurship and reSHAPE and all of that kind of stuff. And it was really interesting hearing other universities talk about how there's a model. It's okay because in Cambridge University there's a model, we know how to do this, and X, Y, Z. We're not in that space in Swansea at all. So that's a really big challenge. Just the resources and the knowledge to be able to do it appropriately. And that's why, and again, I haven't been given wine or chocolate, but if I hadn't had the ARC program, StreetSnap I wouldn't even have a business model. I would still not know what a business model was. You know, I wouldn't be able to commercialize. I wouldn't be able to think about commercialization. So whether StreetSnap's successful or not, and I think you have to think like that with these ventures, I think having that ability to understand this space much more was only possible through the ARC program, but that shouldn't have been the case. I should have been able to learn those skills and those tools through the university. But, you know, many universities, Swansea isn't unique in that sense, I don't think, you know, just don't have the resources to do that, and I hope that's okay, Raj.
Final thoughts.
I think if we do like, you know, bad cop, good cop, then I don't say about the...
You always do this to me. 10 years.
No, in terms of the opportunities as well, I think, you know, we do, that's what I was thinking, you know, if, you know, we do, and we know that, and we actually get told this in the ARC program right from day one, and we get, you know, and it gets hammered down actually. We're not going on our own, we're not flying solo. We have this sort of big label behind us, or this sort of big banner that says, you're in a university, you're in a university. So I think that is the opportunity as well there, that you actually, you don't always have the resources as you want them and when you want them, but you are not on your own. You're not, you know, you are backed up by an institution, and I think that's really important, especially when you don't even know, you know, how to prepare a business case or a business model, or indeed the difference between one and the other, you know, that kind of thing. So feeling sort of that there's a body behind you, supporting you, even if you need to maybe write 20 emails to get that support or whatever, is actually good as well, you know. And also we are in a community. Within any university, we're always in a community. And, you know, we were incredibly fortunate that both of us were in the same cohort, and then it's sort of those conversations as well, and, you know, shared experiences and so on. So that, I think, is an opportunity, you know. But I do actually endorse everything that Lella said as well about the challenges.
Well, that brings this session to a close. I'd like a round of applause for Lella and Nuria for a fantastic and insightful session. Thank you so much. And lunch is upstairs. So